The council chamber existed in a place between dimensions, a massive sphere of crystalline walls that reflected starlight from 1,000 galaxies. 10,000 species had gathered here for the millennial census, a tradition older than most civilizations. Ambassador Deho stood at the registration platform, feeling small despite his confident posture. He was the first human to ever attend this gathering, and every eye in the chamber seemed fixed on him. The Grand Archivist floated before him, a being made entirely of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. Its name was Vexlor, and it had served the council for 3,000 years. Its voice resonated directly in Deho's mind, bypassing the need for sound entirely. Ambassador Deho of Earth, you have submitted your world's coordinates and biological data. Everything appears in order. However, we require one final piece of information for the Universal Registry. The crystal being's light flickered slightly. What is your planet's name in the old tongue? Deho felt confused. Nobody had mentioned this requirement during the preparation briefings. He glanced at his assistant, Hee-Jin, who stood a few steps behind him. She shrugged, equally puzzled. The old tongue was supposedly the first language of the galaxy, predating every known civilization by millions of years. Linguists on Earth had studied fragments of it, enough to create basic translations. I believe the closest translation would be... Deho consulted his datapad, reading the phonetic symbols carefully. He spoke the words, feeling them vibrate strangely in his throat. The syllables felt ancient, powerful, like something that should not be spoken aloud. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Every translation device in the chamber shrieked at once, a piercing wail that made Deho clap his hands over his ears. Delegates across the chamber reacted in horror. 3 of them simply collapsed, their bodies shutting down from shock. Ambassador Taman, representing the Clixian arthropods, retracted all his limbs into his shell with a sound like breaking glass. The chamber erupted into chaos. Beings were shouting in hundreds of languages. Some were fleeing toward the exits. Others were frantically sending messages on their communication devices. Deho stood frozen, utterly confused about what he had done wrong. Chancellor Mordock, the reptilian leader of the council, rose from his elevated seat. His scaled face had lost all color, turning a sickly gray. Session adjourned, he shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. Immediately! All delegates to evacuation stations. Vexlor's crystalline form was flickering wildly now, phasing between dimensions as if something inside was fighting for control. Impossible, the archivist's voice echoed in everyone's minds. The designation. It cannot be. Not inhabited. Not by sentient life. Hee-Jin rushed to Deho's side, her datapad buzzing with incoming messages. Sir, I'm getting emergency calls from every human diplomat in the galaxy. Something about Earth's name has triggered security protocols everywhere. Trade stations are refusing to let our ships dock. 3 embassies have been evacuated. Deho grabbed her arm. What did I say? What does the name mean? Before Hee-Jin could answer, an elderly delegate approached them. She was from the Thought Weavers, a species that communicated through telepathy. Her physical body was frail, barely 4 feet tall, but her mind was powerful enough to make Deho's thoughts feel heavy. She looked at him with something between awe and terror in her large black eyes. Your world's name, she whispered aloud, her voice barely audible. In the old tongue, it translates to many things. The cradle of endurance, the forge of survivors, but most literally, she paused, her hands trembling. It means where death learns to fear. Deho felt his blood run cold. That's impossible. Earth is just... it's our home. It's beautiful. It has oceans and forests and... You came from there. The Thought Weaver interrupted, her eyes widening. Your entire species came from there. And you survived? She backed away from him as if he carried a plague. You not only survived, you built civilizations. You reached the stars. How? Security forces began moving toward the human delegation. They were massive beings in powered armor, carrying weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Deho raised his hand slowly, signaling he meant no threat. Hee-Jin did the same, though he could see fear in her eyes. There must be some mistake, Deho said loudly, addressing the approaching guards. Earth is classified as a Class 7 world in our initial surveys. Moderately challenging but suitable for life. This is an error in translation. Vexlor's voice boomed through the chamber, making the crystal walls vibrate. No error. Accessing sealed archives. Authorization code Ancient Sigma 7. Historical records unrestricted. Holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber. Deho gasped as he saw his home planet projected in stunning detail. But something was wrong. The continents were in different positions. The ice caps were massive, and the date stamp on the image made him dizzy. 250 million years ago. The image shifted, showing different eras. Earth during a time when the oxygen levels would ignite most alien tissues. Earth during the Great Dying when 96% of all life perished. Earth being bombarded by asteroids. Earth frozen in ice ages. Earth burning in volcanic apocalypses. And through it all, life persisted. Life adapted. Life survived. Each image bore a label in various ancient galactic languages. Deho's translator rendered them in English. Forbidden Death World. Approach means extinction. Class 12 Hazard Zone. No sentient life possible. Class 12, not Class 7. The scale went from 1 to 12, with 12 being worlds so hostile that research drones lasted mere hours. Only 3 other Class 12 worlds had ever been discovered in galactic history, and all were lifeless wastelands where the laws of physics themselves seemed hostile to existence. And Earth was one of them. Had always been one of them. For hundreds of millions of years. The archives show 47 expeditions to your world, Vexlor stated, its voice now cold and clinical. 47 civilizations attempted to study it. None returned. The last attempt was 11 million years ago. After that, all records marked it as forbidden territory. Permanent quarantine. Avoid at all costs. Chancellor Mordock descended from his platform, moving slowly toward Deho. The human ambassador noticed that armed guards had surrounded the entire human delegation now. They weren't aiming weapons yet, but the threat was clear. 11 million years ago we sealed those records, Mordock said quietly. Sealed them because they contained nightmares. Species that landed on death worlds and faced horror's evolution had spent eons perfecting. Your world wasn't just hostile, Ambassador. It was impossibly, relentlessly, creatively hostile, and somehow you people not only survived it. He paused, his reptilian eyes showing something Deho had never seen before in the proud Chancellor. Fear. You thrived in it. You mastered it. You walked out of that hell and built starships. Mordock's voice dropped to barely a whisper.
What kind of monsters must you be to call such a place home?
The chamber fell silent. Thousands of delegates waited for Deho's answer. Hijin stood beside him, her face pale but determined. Through the crystalline walls, Deho could see Earth's sun in the distance. Just another star among billions. Home had never seemed so far away. We're not monsters, Deho said finally, his voice steady despite his racing heart. We're just survivors. Earth made us strong because it had to. We learned to adapt because adaptation was the only choice. We learned to work together because alone we died. He looked around the chamber at all the terrified faces. And if that makes us monsters in your eyes, then perhaps you need to reconsider what monsters really are. The silence stretched on. Then Chancellor Mordock made a gesture and the guards activated energy restraints. Ambassador Deho of Earth, you and your delegation are hereby detained pending council judgment. We will determine what to do with a species that survived the impossible. As the restraints closed around his wrists, Deho caught one final glimpse of the holographic displays. They showed Earth in the present day, beautiful and blue and teeming with 8 billion humans. And beneath the image in the old tongue that had caused such panic was a single word that his translator finally rendered properly. Death World. The detention facility orbited a neutron star, its massive gravitational field making escape impossible. Deho sat in a white room with 4 other humans. Hijin was there, along with 3 other diplomats who had been pulled from their posts across the galaxy. Jiho was a xenoanthropologist who had been studying crystal-based life forms. Soman served as a trade negotiator on the Outer Rim. Kwangsu had been Earth's representative to the mining guild. None of them understood why they were prisoners. The door opened without warning, and something flowed into the room. It took Deho a moment to realize he was looking at a living being. The creature appeared to be made of gas, shifting colors from purple to green to blue. It moved with purpose, forming itself into a vaguely humanoid shape that towered over them. I am Prilax, chief xenobiologist of the Galactic Council, the being said, its voice like wind through trees. I have been assigned to interview you. Please understand that I approach this task with great caution. Your species represents a biological impossibility that challenges everything we know about life. Jiho leaned forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear. What do you mean? Impossible? Humans are just another carbon-based life form. Nothing special about our biology. Prillax's gaseous form rippled, which might have been laughter. Nothing special? Let me show you something. The xenobiologist projected images into the air. They showed various alien species engaged in different activities. This is Eclixian during their mating season. They become aggressive, territorial. It is the most dangerous time to encounter them. The image shifted. This is a Vrexian military officer during combat training. They push their bodies to the absolute limit of endurance. Deho watched, not understanding the point. Both species looked formidable, certainly, but not particularly frightening. Now, Prillax continued, I will show you data from your species during what you call a normal day. New images appeared. A human woman running a marathon. A human man climbing a mountain. A human child recovering from an illness. Your resting heart rate is higher than most species' combat rate. Your immune system fights off infections that would kill 80% of known species. Your bones are dense enough to support movement in gravity wells that would cripple most galactic citizens. Your muscles can operate efficiently in both extreme heat and extreme cold. Solomon frowned. That's just normal for us. Earth has different climates, different challenges. We adapted. Exactly. Prillax's form expanded, showing agitation. You adapted to conditions that should have killed you. Let me ask you questions, and please answer honestly. The being shifted closer to Kwang Su. How many natural predators did your ancestors face on a regular basis? Kwang Su thought for a moment. Well, there were big cats, bears, wolves, snakes, crocodiles, sharks, various venomous insects. Stop. Prillax interrupted. You just named 7 categories of apex predators. Most species evolved facing 1, perhaps 2. Your ancestors faced dozens daily. The xenobiologist turned to Hyejin. What percentage of your young survived to adulthood in your pre-technological era? Hyejin looked uncomfortable. Historical records suggest maybe 50 to 60%. Child mortality was high due to disease, predators, accidents, food scarcity. 50%, Prillax said quietly. In galactic terms, that is genocidal. Most species maintain 95% survival rates even in primitive conditions. Your species lost half its children and still thrived. How? The room fell silent. Deho began to understand what the xenobiologist was implying. Humans had always assumed other intelligent species faced similar challenges. The idea that Earth was uniquely hostile had never occurred to them. Prillax brought up more images, these showing Earth's history and fast forward. The humans watched their home planet suffer through catastrophe after catastrophe, massive volcanoes erupting, covering the sky in ash, ice ages freezing vast portions of land, asteroid impacts wiping out dominant species, diseases spreading through populations, climate shifts happening over mere generations instead of slow geological time. Your planet has experienced 5 major extinction events, Prillax explained. Events so catastrophic that they reset evolution itself. The worst killed 96% of all life. Yet life returned. It adapted. It found ways to survive in the aftermath. And eventually it produced you. Jiho was taking notes on his datapad, his scientific mind processing the information. So what you're saying is that Earth's constant catastrophes created intense evolutionary pressure. Only the most adaptable, most resilient species survived. Over millions of years, this pressure shaped everything on Earth to be tougher, faster, more aggressive than life on more stable worlds. Precisely, Prillax confirmed. But it goes deeper than that. Let me show you footage from the ancient surveys. The holographic display changed, showing what looked like camera feeds from spacecraft. The date stamps indicated these recordings were millions of years old. Daiho watched as alien explorers in environmental suits landed on Earth during what might have been the Carboniferous period. The oxygen levels were listed at 35%, compared to modern Earth's 21%. Watch what happens, Prillax said softly. One of the alien explorers cut a small plant sample. The plant's sap ignited instantly in the high oxygen environment, and the fire spread with terrifying speed. Within seconds, the entire landing site was ablaze. The aliens fled back to their ship, but one didn't make it. His suit breached, and he breathed the super-oxygenated air. His body convulsed, systems overloading. He died in agony while his companions watched helplessly. That was the 3rd expedition, Prillax said. The 5th expedition encountered your Permian period. They landed during what you call the Great Dying. Volcanic gases, acid rain, temperatures swinging between freezing and boiling within hours. None survived to return to orbit. More footage played. Different expeditions, different eras, all ending in disaster. Explorers torn apart by predators that moved faster than their sensors could track. Scientists infected by microorganisms that treated advanced medical containment as a minor inconvenience. Research teams trapped by sudden climate shifts that turned forests into deserts overnight. The last attempt was 11 million years ago, Prillax continued. A military expedition of 500 soldiers fully armed in powered combat suits. They landed to study what they thought was a simple forest environment. 90% were dead within 3 days. The survivors reported plants that dissolved metal, insects whose venom caused hallucinations and paralysis, predators that hunted in coordinated packs with near-sentient intelligence. They classified Earth as Class 12 and recommended permanent quarantine. Kwang-Soo spoke up, his voice shaking slightly. But that was just animals and plants doing what they naturally do. They weren't trying to kill the explorers specifically. They were just being themselves. Exactly, Prillax said, and his tone held something like horror. Your world's normal state is lethal to 99% of galactic life, and you consider it home. You evolved there. You thrived there. You built civilizations there despite every possible obstacle. The door to the detention room opened again, and several more beings entered. Daeho recognized some of them from the council chamber. They moved carefully, maintaining distance from the humans as if proximity itself was dangerous. One of them, an avian creature with brilliant blue feathers, stepped forward. I am Kixara, elder of the Windrider species. We are part of what the council calls the Survivors Circle. 12 species who have each encountered Class 11 death worlds and lived to tell the tale. We asked to meet you because we needed to understand. Another being, this one covered in thick armor plating, spoke in a grinding voice. My people sent an expedition to a Class 11 world 3,000 years ago. Of 500 explorers, 12 survived. They were considered heroes, but they never recovered mentally. The nightmares, the trauma, we still study their accounts to this day. Kixara's feathers ruffled with agitation. Class 11 worlds taught us humility. They showed us that the universe contains horrors beyond our capacity to fight. We learned to identify such worlds and avoid them. Your world was classified as Class 12. Worse than anything we faced. Yet you didn't avoid it. You couldn't. You were born there. Daeho stood up slowly, making no sudden movements. I think I'm beginning to understand. You're not afraid of humans because we're aggressive or violent. You're afraid because we survived something you believe should have killed us. And if we survived Earth, you're wondering what else we're capable of. The armored being shifted uncomfortably. 3 cycles ago, we admitted a species from a Class 9 world to the Council. They seemed peaceful at first. Within 50 years, they controlled 40 star systems through conquest. Their empire collapsed only when they turned on each other, but millions died in the process. Your world is Class 12, Kixara said quietly. 3 levels worse than theirs. And unlike them, you humans survived together. You built societies, cooperated, reached the stars as a unified species. If a Class 9 species became conquerors, what might a Class 12 species become? Soman stood up beside Daeho, her diplomatic training kicking in. What they might become depends on what they choose to be. Earth didn't just teach us to survive. It taught us the value of cooperation. Every major catastrophe in our history, we survived by working together. Communities sharing resources during famines. Strangers helping strangers during disasters. Different nations putting aside conflicts to face common threats. She's right, Jiho added. Yes, Earth made us tough, but it also made us empathetic. When you've suffered, really suffered, you don't want others to go through the same thing. That's why humans created medicine. Why we build shelters, why we send aid to disaster zones. Prillax's gaseous form rippled thoughtfully. An interesting perspective, but the Council remains concerned. Strength without compassion is dangerous, but strength with compassion can be equally problematic. You might decide you know what's best for the galaxy, that your death world experience gives you the right to impose your will on others. The door opened once more, and Chancellor Mordock entered. His reptilian features were composed now, the initial shock having worn off. He looked at each human carefully before speaking. The Council has reviewed all historical data. Earth is confirmed as a Class 12 death world. Your species is confirmed as having not only survived it but mastered it. This presents the Council with an unprecedented situation. He paused. Some members want to quarantine your entire species on Earth. Others advocate for preemptive military action while you're still technologically inferior. A third faction proposes something different. Deho felt his heart pounding. What do they propose? A test, Mordock said simply. 3 trials designed to assess whether humanity can coexist peacefully with the rest of the galaxy. Pass all 3, and you'll be granted full council membership with all associated rights and protections. Fail even one. He let the implications hang in the air. Hyejin spoke up. And if we refuse the tests, then we default to quarantine. Humanity confined to your solar system for 10,000 years, long enough for the Council to develop defenses against you if necessary. Mordock's eyes fixed on Deho. The choice is yours, Ambassador. Will you accept the trials? Deho looked at his fellow humans. He saw fear in their eyes, but also determination. They had survived Earth. They could survive this. He turned back to Mordock and nodded slowly. We'll take your tests, Chancellor, and we'll prove that Deathworld survivors aren't monsters. We're just people trying to find our place in the universe. Mordock's expression remained unreadable. Then let the trials begin. The council chamber was packed with observers from across the galaxy. Thousands of species watched as Ambassador Sunwoo, Earth's chief diplomat, stood before the central platform. Sunwoo was older than Deho, with gray hair and steady eyes that had witnessed Earth's most difficult negotiations. He had volunteered to represent humanity during the trials. Chancellor Mordock's voice echoed through the chamber. The Council has designed 3 trials to assess humanity's nature. These trials will test your combat capability, your diplomatic wisdom, and your moral character. Each test has been administered to hundreds of species over the millennia. The standards are clear, the measurements precise. Sunwoo bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that many species in the chamber recognized. We are ready, Chancellor. Where do we begin? The first trial takes place on Velkaris, a moon maintained by the Hive Mind Collective. It is an ecosystem containing life forms from across the galaxy, specifically designed to test survival capabilities. Your task is simple. Retrieve a beacon from the center of the moon within 7 planetary rotations. You may bring 30 individuals, no advanced weapons, no external supplies beyond basic environmental suits. The holographic display showed Velkaris, a verdant moon covered in dense forests and winding rivers. It looked beautiful, almost peaceful. Sunwoo studied the image carefully, noting the way the vegetation seemed unusually thick, how the shadows moved in ways that suggested large creatures. We accept the first trial, Sunwoo said calmly. 3 days later, Kwangsu stood at the head of 30 humans on the surface of Velkaris. The air was breathable but humid, making every breath feel heavy. The forest around them pulsed with life, strange calls echoing through the canopy. Among his team were soldiers like Dongyun and Yunji, medic Jiyeon, and engineer Minho. Each had been specifically chosen for their Earth survival skills. What the Council hadn't told them was that Velkaris contained predators from a dozen different death worlds, species that had evolved in conditions nearly as harsh as Earth. The test was designed to be lethal. No species had ever survived more than 3 rotations. The Council expected humans to activate their emergency beacons and beg for evacuation within hours. The humans moved through the forest in a standard patrol formation, but Donghyun noticed something immediately. These tracks, he said, kneeling beside deep gouges in the soil. 3-toed heavyweight distribution. Claw marks angled for gripping and tearing. This is an ambush predator, probably arboreal. Yunji climbed a nearby tree with practiced ease, scanning the canopy. Movement at 2 o'clock, about 50 meters. Large shape, definitely predatory based on the stalking behavior. It's following us, Kwangsu made quick decisions. Minho, can you rig motion sensors using our equipment? The engineer nodded, already pulling components from his pack. Give me 10 minutes. I can create a perimeter warning system using the power cells from our lights. As they worked, Jiyeon treated minor cuts and scratches that the team had already accumulated from the aggressive plant life. These thorns have a mild paralytic agent, she noted, examining one under a portable microscope. Similar to Earth's stonefish toxin. Our bodies can process it, but it'll cause numbness and pain. Try to avoid contact. The first real attack came that night. The creature dropped from the canopy, a mass of scales and teeth that moved faster than their eyes could track. But Dongyun had faced tigers in Earth's remaining wilderness preserves. He understood how ambush predators thought, how they relied on surprise and overwhelming force. He rolled aside at the last second, shouting warnings that brought the entire team into defensive positions. The creature was massive, easily 3 times the size of an earth lion. Its 6 limbs ended in razor claws, and its jaw could probably swallow a human whole. But it was alone, and humans had spent millennia learning to fight predators through teamwork. They drove it back using coordinated movements, making themselves appear larger and more dangerous than individual targets. The creature eventually retreated, confused by prey that fought back so effectively. Council observers watching through orbital satellites sat in stunned silence. No species had ever repelled that particular predator on first contact. The humans reached the beacon site in 4 rotations, moving steadily through terrain that should have killed them. They navigated toxic plants using principles learned from Earth's rainforests. They avoided venomous creatures by recognizing warning patterns similar to Earth's snakes. They crossed rivers by testing for predators the same way humans had learned to cross crocodile-infested waters. When they retrieved the beacon, Kwangsu contacted the orbital station. Beacon secured. Mission complete. Request permission to remain on Velcaris for additional study. The local ecology is fascinating, and we'd like to document several species we've encountered. The council representatives could barely process the request. These Death World survivors wanted to stay longer in an environment designed to kill them. The second trial began immediately after the humans returned. This trial was different, focusing on diplomacy rather than survival. Hyejin, Soman, and political officer Yuna were led into a simulation chamber where 3 factions of silicon-based life forms were locked in bitter conflict. Each faction had valid grievances, each demanded justice that contradicted the others, and each possessed weapons capable of mutual destruction. The council observer, an elderly crystalline being, explained the test. Every species that attempts this trial chooses one faction to support. This inevitably leads to war, and the simulation always ends in genocide. The test measures how quickly you recognize the futility and withdraw, hopefully before too many simulated beings die. Yuna studied the factions carefully. One had been displaced from their homeland by environmental disaster. One had suffered economic exploitation for generations. One had seen their cultural sites destroyed by conflict. They're all victims, she said quietly, and they all want revenge disguised as justice. For the first week, the humans simply listened. They met with each faction separately, hearing stories of suffering and loss. They asked questions without offering solutions, focused on understanding rather than fixing. The council observers grew impatient, waiting for the inevitable choice of sides. Hyejin recognized something in the conflict. This mirrors Earth's ethnic and religious wars, she told her companions. Groups that suffered seeking to make others suffer in return. The cycle never breaks until someone chooses to break it. Soman proposed a radical approach. What if we don't choose a side? What if we introduce restorative justice principles instead? She explained the concept, developed painfully over centuries of Earth conflicts. Rather than punishing wrongdoers, communities would acknowledge harm, make amends, and work toward collective healing. The simulation's artificial intelligence struggled to process this approach. Its programming assumed adversarial solutions, winners and losers. But the humans persisted, introducing concepts of truth commissions, communal reconciliation, and shared governance. Slowly and possibly, the warring factions began talking to each other instead of about each other. The simulation didn't end in peace, not completely. Old wounds didn't heal overnight, but the trajectory changed from inevitable genocide to possible coexistence. For the first time in 3,000 test runs, the AI couldn't predict the outcome because the conflict was de-escalating. The council observers watched in silence. One whispered, "They've done this before. On their world. Many times." The final trial was psychological, designed to reveal core values under extreme stress. Each human participant, including Daeho, Jiho, and pilot Seojin, was placed in isolated virtual simulation. The scenario was identical for each. Save your own life or sacrifice yourself to save strangers from another species. There was no trick, no hidden option. Just a binary choice with life or death consequences. The test had been administered to thousands of species over millennia. Most chose self-preservation, which was considered the rational choice. Some chose sacrifice, which was marked as either nobility or mental instability depending on context. The Council used the results to profile species' decision-making patterns under pressure. Every human chose sacrifice within seconds. Not after deliberation, not with hesitation. They made the choice as automatically as breathing. Daeho's simulation placed him in a failing spacecraft with one escape pod and 2 injured aliens he'd never met. He climbed into the pod, loaded both aliens inside, and launched it remotely while staying behind. The simulation ended with his death as the ship exploded. When the Council representatives asked him to explain his reasoning, Daeho seemed confused by the question. There were 2 of them and 1 of me. The math was obvious. But you would have lived if you'd taken the pod yourself, the interviewer pressed. Yes, but then they would have died. I couldn't live with that. Daeho frowned. Is that not normal? On Earth, if you watch someone die when you could help, you're not just letting them die. You're killing part of yourself. We learned that lesson in every famine, every disaster, every plague. Individual survival means nothing if the community dies. The pattern held across all 30 human participants. Seojun sacrificed herself to save a child from a collapsing building. Jiho gave up his oxygen to rescue an unconscious alien. Every single human chose others over self. The Council convened an emergency session. The 3 trials were complete, but the results defied all predictions. Humans had survived a death world ecosystem with minimal casualties. They had de-escalated an unsolvable conflict through innovative thinking. And they had uniformly chosen sacrifice over survival when faced with moral crisis. Chancellor Mordock addressed the full assembly. The trials were designed to expose humanity's flaws. Instead, they have exposed our assumptions. We believed death. World survivors would be ruthless, aggressive, self-serving, but these humans succeeded through cooperation, empathy, and self-sacrifice. An observer from the Luminari, the galaxy's oldest civilization, spoke for the first time. Her name was Ilara, and her species had been watching the trials with great interest. Chancellor, perhaps we've been asking the wrong question. We feared what Death World survivors would do to us. We should have asked what Death World survivors had to do to survive. Earth didn't reward selfishness. It rewarded cooperation. It didn't reward cruelty. It rewarded empathy. The humans survived by becoming better than their world, not worse. Mordock nodded slowly. The motion before the Council is clear. Do we welcome humanity as full members, or do we maintain quarantine? Protocols. Before the vote could begin, emergency alarms blared throughout the chamber. Red lights flashed as priority alerts overrode all other systems. A synthetic voice announced, "Hostile incursion detected. Unknown vessels entering Council space. Classification: Devourer class threat. Time to contact: 6 hours." The chamber erupted in panic. The Devourers were a legend, a nightmare from the galaxy's ancient past. Machine intelligences that consumed entire civilizations, harvesting their technology and biology for their own expansion. They hadn't been seen in 10,000 years. And now they were here, bearing down on the Council's heart while humanity's fate hung in balance. Seojun stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. 6 hours? Our Earth emergency response teams train for situations with 6-minute windows. She looked at Daeho, then at the assembled Council. Permission to assist, Chancellor? Mordock stared at her, then at the tactical display showing 300 Devourer warships approaching. The Council's defense fleet consisted of ceremonial vessels, never designed for actual combat. The nearest military reinforcements were 3 days away. You would fight for us? Mordock asked quietly. After we imprisoned you, tested you, threatened your species? Daeho stood beside Seojun, his expression calm despite the approaching doom. That's what Earth taught us, Chancellor. When someone needs help, you help. Even if they were your enemy yesterday, especially then. The vote on humanity's membership was forgotten as new crisis demanded immediate action. But in that moment, watching humans volunteer to defend the very beings who had judged them, the galaxy began to understand what Death World survivors really were, not monsters. Protectors. The Devourer fleet materialized at the edge of Council space like a swarm of metal locusts. 300 warships, each one a nightmare of salvage technology and adaptive weapon systems. They had consumed dozens of civilizations over millions of years, incorporating their victims' best innovations into their own designs. Each ship pulsed with stolen power, driven by artificial intelligence that viewed organic life as nothing more than raw material. Their message was transmitted on all frequencies, cold and mechanical. Surrender your technology and biological data. Compliance will result in quick termination. Resistance will result in extended processing. You have one rotation to decide. Commander Borum stood on the bridge of the Indomitable Dawn, humanity's modest exploration vessel currently docked at Council Station. Her crew numbered 200, barely enough to staff a single ship properly. Around her, the Council's defense fleet scrambled to organize itself, but she could see immediately that they were doomed. The ships were beautiful, ceremonial, designed for showing prestige rather than fighting wars. They had elegant lines and polished hulls, but their weapons were minimal, and their armor was decorative. The Council's military coordinator, a six-limbed being named Prex, was broadcasting increasingly desperate messages trying to organize a defense. His voice trembled with barely controlled panic. All available vessels to defensive formation Delta 7. Activate shields to maximum. Prepare evasion protocols. Borum watched the tactical display and saw the futility immediately. The Devourers moved with precision that spoke of countless battles. They would tear through the Council fleet in minutes. She opened a comm channel to the Council's command center. This is Commander Borum of the Indomitable Dawn, requesting permission to engage the hostile fleet. There was a long pause. Then, Chancellor Mordok's voice came through, filled with confusion and something that might have been hope. Commander, we appreciate the gesture, but your single vessel cannot possibly make a difference. We will not ask you to sacrifice yourselves for our mistakes. Please evacuate to safe distance. Borum smiled grimly. With respect, Chancellor, you don't understand. This is what we trained for. One of my officers will explain our engagement plan. Tactical Officer Taijun, please transmit our proposed strategy. Taijun was a young man with sharp eyes and hands that moved quickly across his console. When he spoke, his voice was steady despite the approaching doom. Council Command, transmitting tactical analysis now. The Indomitable Dawn will use the neutron star's gravity well as a force multiplier. We'll create debris fields to disrupt their sensor arrays, navigate through radiation zones to mask our position, and execute hit-and-run strikes using the star's magnetic fields as cover. Prex studied the transmission and his confusion only grew. These tactics assume you'll be operating at the edge of survivable conditions. The radiation zones will kill your crew. The gravity stresses will tear your ship apart. This is a suicide plan. No, sir, Taijun corrected politely. This is a standard Earth combat doctrine. We always assume the enemy has superior numbers and better weapons. We always assume we're fighting from the brink of extinction. That's just normal for us. Other Council vessels began picking up the human transmission. Military observers from 100 species listened in growing horror as Taijun outlined humanity's standard tactical approaches. Every strategy assumed catastrophic losses. Every contingency planned for worst-case scenarios. Terms like acceptable, casualty rates, and strategic withdrawal revealed a species that never fought from positions of strength. One observer whispered, "They plan for genocide as their starting position." The Devourers were 3 hours from weapons range when the Indomitable Dawn undocked from Council Station and began moving toward the neutron star. Borum's voice came, over open channels broadcasting to both the Council fleet and the approaching enemy. All Council vessels fall back to second defensive line. Do not engage directly. We'll create an opening in their formation. Be ready to exploit it. The Devourer's response was immediate and mocking. Single organic vessel approaching. Analysis. Insufficient firepower to pose threat. Classification. Irrelevant. Continuing primary approach vector. What happened next would be studied by military historians for generations. The Indomitable Dawn didn't fire a single weapon initially. Instead, Pilot Seojin threaded the ship through the neutron star's outer radiation belt, using the intense gravitational field to slingshot chunks of debris toward the Devourer formation. The debris wasn't dangerous by itself, but it forced the enemy ships to adjust their trajectories, small adjustments that disrupted their perfect formation. Then Taejun activated a plan so audacious that half the council observers thought it was suicide. He deliberately vented the ship's main reactor coolant into space, creating a massive cloud of superheated plasma. The neutron star's magnetic field caught the plasma, spreading it across thousands of cubic kilometers. The Devourer's sensor arrays, designed to track fast-moving targets, couldn't compensate for the sudden interference. 40 Devourer ships moved to intercept the indomitable Dawn, considering it a minor nuisance to eliminate before continuing to Council Station. They surrounded the human vessel, preparing to open fire. Engineer Minho had been waiting for exactly this moment. He triggered a controlled cascade failure in the ship's main reactor, timing it with precision learned from 1,000 simulations. The reactor didn't explode randomly. It detonated exactly when the Devourers were in optimal position. The electromagnetic pulse from the explosion cascaded through the enemy formation, shorting out systems and disrupting their networked intelligence. 20 Devourer ships went completely dark. The others staggered, their coordination broken. In that moment of chaos, the Council fleet struck, not with overwhelming force because they didn't have it, but with coordinated strikes targeting the confused enemy vessels exactly as Taejun had planned. The indomitable Dawn was dying. Radiation was cooking its hull. The reactor explosion had crippled every major system. But Borum's crew kept fighting. Weapons Officer Hanul noticed that the Devourers hesitated for exactly 1.3 seconds before firing, calculating optimal targeting solutions. She exploited that tiny window with erratic maneuvers that made the ship impossible to predict. Every dodge bought a few more seconds. Science Officer Yeonsu had been analyzing the Devourer communication protocols since they first appeared. He noticed patterns similar to computer viruses from Earth's early digital age. Viruses that spread through networks, corrupting data and causing cascading failures. He crafted a digital weapon using humanity's centuries of experience fighting malicious software, then transmitted it on the frequency the Devourers used to coordinate. The virus spread through the enemy fleet like wildfire through dry grass. It didn't destroy them, but it made them doubt their own sensor readings, question their targeting solutions, second-guess their tactical decisions. The machine intelligence that had conquered galaxies found itself fighting ghosts and shadows. Other council species began adapting human tactics. The Clixians used their natural swarming behavior to overwhelm isolated Devourer vessels. The crystalline archivists provided computational support that amplified Yansu's virus. The Thoughtweavers coordinated tactics across vast distances, their telepathy proving superior to technological communication. For the first time in recorded history, the Council fought as a unified military force. But the battle was still going badly. Devourer reinforcements were adapting to the human strategies. Their machine learning was terrifyingly fast. Within an hour, they had compensated for the virus, adjusted their formations, and begun pushing back the Council fleet. That's when the situation became critical. 50 Devourer ships broke from the main battle and accelerated toward a civilian transport vessel, carrying evacuees from Council Station, 3,000 beings from a dozen species, mostly non-combatants. The transport was slow, unarmed, completely defenseless. Boram made her decision in seconds. Helm, intercept course, maximum acceleration. Dongyun, now serving as tactical coordinator after transferring to the Dawn before the battle, voiced the concern everyone felt. Commander, the intercept course takes us directly through the neutron star's death zone. The radiation will kill us in 8 minutes. Our shields are already failing. Then we have 8 minutes to save 3,000 lives, Boram replied calmly. All hands, this is the commander. I won't sugarcoat it. We're about to enter lethal radiation. We probably won't survive, but those civilians definitely won't survive if we don't act.
Anyone who wants to evacuate to life pods has 30 seconds. Nobody moved.
Nobody left their post. The indomitable Dawn dove into radiation levels that would have killed most galactic species instantly. Human biology hardened by millions of years on a death world lasted longer. Not long enough to survive, but long enough to fight. Boram's skin began showing radiation burns. Taejun's hands trembled on his console as his nervous system started failing. Hanul's eyes were bleeding, but she kept targeting solutions updated. They became a weapon. The failing shields, instead of being useless, became reflectors for the intense radiation. The dying reactor became a gravity bomb. The ship itself became a projectile, guided by a crew that understood sacrifice wasn't heroism on Earth. It was just what you did. In 7 minutes and 43 seconds, the indomitable Dawn destroyed all 50 Devourer vessels pursuing the civilian transport. The cost was Commander Borum's entire crew, 200 humans who chose 3,000 alien lives over their own without hesitation. The battle turned after that. The Council fleet, inspired by impossible courage, fought with renewed determination. The Devourer fleet, facing tactics and weapons they couldn't predict, began making errors. When the first Council reinforcements arrived 3 hours later, they found the enemy in full retreat. The legendary Devourers, undefeated for 10,000 years, fled from a ragtag defense force led by humans who treated suicide missions as standard procedure. Recovery teams found the indomitable Dawn drifting near the neutron star, a radioactive tomb. They couldn't retrieve the bodies safely, so they left the ship as a monument. But they did recover the ship's final log. Commander Borum's last message, recorded as radiation, literally cooked her alive. Her face was burned, her voice weak, but her eyes were clear. "This is Commander Borum, final log entry. If you're watching this, we probably succeeded. The transport escaped, the civilians are safe. That's what matters," she coughed, blood speckling her lips. "People watching this might think we were heroes. We weren't. We're just from Earth. We've died 1 billion times throughout history to let life continue. Every plague, every famine, every disaster, we died so others could live. This wasn't special. This wasn't even hard compared to what Earth put us through. This was just what you do when someone needs help and you're the only one who can give it." The message ended. The Council chamber fell silent as representatives from 10,000 civilizations watched it. Chancellor Mordock stood, his voice heavy with emotion. "Emergency session convened. The human delegation will approach the judgment platform." Deho, Hijin, and the other surviving human diplomats walked to the center of the chamber. Around them, beings who had feared humanity now looked at them with something else entirely. Mordock spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully. "You sacrificed 200 beings without hesitation. You weaponized suicide. You fought like extinction was preferable to surrender. These actions terrify us." He paused, his eyes meeting Deho's. "But you also saved 3,000 lives of species you'd never met. You inspired our scattered forces to fight as one. You defeated an enemy we thought invincible." His voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "What are you?" Deho stepped forward. His voice was steady, but grief showed in his eyes. He had known Borum, she had been his friend. "We're what Earth made us, Chancellor. On our world, cooperation meant survival. Sacrifice for the group meant the species thrived. We've mourned billions of our own dead across millennia. 200 brave souls choosing death to save thousands?" He looked around the chamber at thousands of alien faces. "That's not horror to us. That's Tuesday. That's what we do. That's what Earth taught us we must do." Before anyone could respond, another transmission arrived from Earth. Admiral Cholsu appeared on the screens, his uniform crisp and his face showing controlled anger. Behind him, the Council observers could see something that made their blood run cold. 3,000 warships. Battle-scarred, weapon-laden, designed for actual war rather than ceremony. Earth's home defense fleet, mobilized in full force. "We received word that a Council vessel protected our people and paid the ultimate price," Cholsu said, his voice cold as vacuum. "We're inbound with humanitarian aid and military support. Arrival in 36 hours. His smile had no warmth in it, and we will discuss what happened here. No one attacks our allies twice." The transmission ended. The galaxy watched Earth's war fleet begin its journey. And for the first time, they understood the true horror of the Death World survivors. Not that they would conquer, but that they would protect, that they would die for strangers, that they would fight wars for people they barely knew, because that's what Earth had taught them. And Earth's lessons were written in 4 billion years of survival against impossible odds. Admiral Cholsu's fleet emerged from hyperspace like a storm made of metal and purpose. 3,000 warships arranged in perfect formation, each one bearing the scars of humanity's countless conflicts. The ships weren't beautiful like Council vessels, with their elegant curves and artistic designs. Earth's ships were functional, brutal, designed by a species that had learned war was about survival rather than glory. The Council defense perimeter lit up with alarms as sensors tried to process the massive fleet. Panic spread through stations and habitats. Evacuation orders were issued. Military forces prepared for what they assumed would be an invasion. Species that had debated humanity's quarantine now faced the nightmare scenario they'd feared. Death World survivors arriving with overwhelming military force. But the invasion never came. Instead, the first wave of ships that approached Council Station were hospital vessels and repair drones. Medical teams contacted the station offering assistance. Engineering crews asked where help was needed most. Supply ships requested permission to deliver food, water, and medical supplies to stations damaged in the Devourer attack. Prex, the Council's military coordinator, stared at his displays in confusion. They're not attacking. They're helping? Admiral Chulsu's face appeared on every screen in Council space. Behind him, the vast fleet maintained perfect formation, weapons powered down but very obviously present. This is Admiral Chulsu of the Earth Defense Force. We're here to render humanitarian aid and provide military security while your forces recover. We're also here to honor our dead. The transmission showed footage of the indomitable Dawn, still drifting near the neutron star. Human ships approached it carefully, their crews in heavy radiation suits. They couldn't retrieve the bodies, but they could mark the vessel as a tomb. One by one, Earth's warships performed a flyby, each captain saluting the fallen. It was a funeral for soldiers who died protecting strangers. In the council chamber, emergency session was still ongoing. Delegates whispered among themselves, trying to understand what was happening. Earth had sent a fleet large enough to conquer half the galaxy, but that fleet was distributing aid and honoring the dead instead of making demands. Chancellor Mordock watched the displays with an unreadable expression. He turned to Deho, who stood calmly amid the chaos. Your admiral brings 3,000 warships and asks for nothing? He's asking for the same thing Commander Borum asked for, Deho replied quietly. Permission to help. That's all humans have ever wanted from the Council, a chance to be part of something larger than ourselves. The fear was still there, visible in the faces of delegates throughout the chamber. Some species had military forces that couldn't match even a fraction of Earth's fleet. Intelligence reports were already flooding in, painting a terrifying picture. Earth had colonies on 40 Death World candidates, each one producing resources and technology. Human population growth followed mathematical models of species expecting constant extinction events, always preparing for the next catastrophe. Their industrial capacity assumed permanent warfare. A representative from the insectoid Clixians stood, his chitinous shell rattling with anxiety. Ambassador Deho, please help us understand. Your species has the military power to dominate this council. You could demand anything. Why do you only ask to help? Hijin stepped forward, her diplomatic training evident in her careful words. Because Earth taught us that strength without purpose is just violence. We have power because we had to develop it to survive. But we also learned that surviving alone means dying slowly. Every disaster in our history, every plague, every famine, we only made it through by helping each other. She's right, Jiho added, his voice carrying the weight of years studying other cultures. Yes, Earth made us strong, but it also made us understand suffering. When you've truly suffered, you don't want others to experience the same. That's why we built hospitals, why we created emergency services, why we send aid to disaster zones even when it costs us. Mordock raised a hand for silence. Ambassadors, I understand your words, but words are easy. Your military fleet speaks a different language. How do we trust that your compassion will outlast your power? How do we trust that Death World survivors won't eventually decide they know what's best for the galaxy? Before anyone could answer, a new voice spoke from the observers' gallery. Ilara of the Luminari descended from her platform, her ancient form gliding through the air with graceful purpose. The Luminari were the oldest civilization in the galaxy, witnesses to 10,000 species rise and fall. Chancellor, permit me to address the Council, Ilara said, her voice resonating with authority. We Luminari have observed this galaxy for millions of years. We watched the Devourers consume civilizations. We saw species rise to power and fall to corruption. We have never intervened, believing each species must find its own path. She turned to face Deho and the human delegation. But we have also never seen what we witnessed yesterday. A species 3 weeks into council membership, sacrificing themselves completely for strangers, not for resources, not for territory, not for political advantage, simply because strangers needed help and they could provide it. Ilara's eyes, ancient and knowing, swept across the chamber. Earth's historical records reveal their darkest moments. They've committed genocides, waged pointless wars, destroyed their own environment. They know their capacity for evil because they've lived it, and that knowledge made them build systems specifically designed to prevent it from happening again. She pulled up holographic displays showing Earth's development. After their most terrible war, they created something called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. After nearly destroying their planet, they formed international environmental coalitions. After centuries of ethnic conflicts, they established truth and reconciliation commissions. They didn't just survive Earth. They learned from their mistakes in ways most species never do. The chamber fell silent as delegates processed this information. Ilara continued. The question isn't whether humans have power. The question is what they've proven they'll do with it. And the evidence is clear. They'll use it to protect others, even at catastrophic cost to themselves. A delegate from the Thought Weavers spoke up, her telepathic voice reaching everyone simultaneously. The Luminaries speak wisdom, but concerns remain. Today they protect. Tomorrow they might decide protection requires control. Earth's military doctrine assumes total war as normal operating procedure. What happens when they apply that doctrine to what they perceive as galactic threats? Deho understood the concern. He had studied Earth's history, knew how easily protection could become domination. You're right to worry. That's why we're proposing something different. He activated a holographic presentation. The Mutual Defense Coalition, a voluntary alliance where every species maintains complete sovereignty. Earth offers military training but under council oversight. We share survival technologies but with ethical guidelines established by all members collectively. Admiral Chulsu's image appeared on screen, joining the presentation remotely. The coalition isn't an empire. It's not a federation. It's a commitment. When any member faces existential threat, others respond, not with conquest but with aid, not with demands but with support. His scarred face showed the cost of his convictions. We've been alone in the dark for too long. We're offering a hand to everyone else who feels the same way. The proposal sparked immediate debate. Some species saw opportunity, others saw threat. Chancellor Mordok's faction, representing 20 civilizations, remained skeptical. They argued for restrictions on human power, weapons limitations, population controls, territorial boundaries. Mordok gave an impassioned speech. Today they offer help we accept. Tomorrow they return, perhaps demanding compliance in exchange for protection. We've seen this pattern before. The species from the Class 9 world started as helpers. Within 50 years they were conquerors. Earth is Class 12, 3 levels worse. Can we really trust them? The debate raged for hours. Some delegates supported immediate acceptance of the human proposal. Others demanded stricter controls. A third faction wanted to maintain the quarantine option, keeping humans confined to their region of space until the Council developed adequate defenses. Then news arrived that changed everything. A Class 7 death world in the Outer Rim, home to the Pelkari people, was experiencing catastrophic volcanic eruptions. The primitive but sentient species faced extinction. Their world lacked technology for evacuation. They didn't even know the rest of the galaxy existed. The Council's first contact protocols were absolute. No interference with pre-spaceflight civilizations. Observation only. It was a law written in response to past disasters when advanced species had accidentally destroyed primitive cultures through well-meaning intervention. But Mordok's own daughter, Felka, served as a xenobiologist on the observation station orbiting the Pelkari homeworld. The station was losing orbit, pulled down by gravitational shifts from the volcanic activity. Velka and her team would die along with the Pelkari unless someone violated the law. The Council debated. Protocol demanded they maintain the law. 60 billion Pelkari would die, along with 20 Council scientists, but the law would remain intact. The alternative was to break their most sacred rule and face the consequences. Earth's fleet could reach the planet in 3 hours, but doing so meant violating first contact protocols, confirming every fear the Council had about humans ignoring rules they considered inconvenient. Daiho faced an impossible choice. Obey galactic law and watch innocents die, or break it and prove the Council's worst fears correct. He looked at Mordok, whose stoic facade was cracking as he watched his daughter's station burn on the monitors. Admiral Chulsu contacted Deho privately. Give me the word, Ambassador. We can be there in 3 hours. Save the Pelkari and your Chancellor's daughter. Deho felt the weight of his species' future pressing down. One wrong choice could condemn humanity to permanent isolation. But he also felt the weight of Earth's lessons. Every human disaster, every plague, every famine had taught the same lesson. When someone needs help, you help. I won't authorize military intervention, Deho said slowly, his mind working through options. That would be Earth imposing its will on the Council. But I also won't stop individual captains from making their own moral choices. He opened a general broadcast to the human fleet. All Earth vessels, you've heard about the Pelkari situation. Council law forbids intervention. Earth law requires me to respect that. But Earth also taught us that individual conscience supersedes law in moral emergencies. Any captain who chooses to act will do so without authorization, accepting full responsibility for violating Council protocols. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Captain Youngme of the medical vessel Evergreen broke formation. This is Captain Youngme. I'm making my own decision to render humanitarian aid. No military escort, no weapons, just rescue shuttles and medical supplies. I'll face Council judgment afterward. The Evergreen jumped to hyperspace before anyone could stop it. 3 hours later, it arrived at the Pelkari homeworld. Youngme's crew evacuated the observation station, saving Velka and her team. Then, in clear violation of every protocol, they began evacuating Pelkari from the disaster zones. They saved 60,000 primitive beings who would later tell stories of sky angels who appeared during the fire time. Youngme returned to Council space and immediately surrendered herself to authorities. She was arrested, her ship impounded, her career over. Earth's diplomatic standing hung by a thread as the Council debated the violation. Chancellor Mordock visited Youngme in her detention cell. His daughter Velka stood beside him, alive because a human had broken the rules. Why? Mordock asked, his voice rough with emotion. You knew it meant imprisonment. Your captain's career is finished. Your species' reputation is damaged. Why? Youngme looked up at him with steady eyes. Because your daughter's life mattered more than my comfort, Chancellor. Because 60,000 Pelkari deserved a chance to survive. That's not unique to humans. It's what any decent being should do. Earth just taught us that we can't live with ourselves if we don't. Velka stepped forward, tears streaming down her scaled face. She saved my life, Father. She saved everyone on that station. She saved 60,000 beings who never knew the galaxy existed. And we're going to punish her for it? Mordock stood silent for a long moment. Then he turned and left the cell. Hours later, he addressed the full council with his daughter beside him. I feared humanity because they're powerful, Mordock said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. I feared them because they survived what should have killed them. I feared they would use their strength to dominate us, to impose their will, to become the monsters we imagined. He paused, looking at Velka. But I was wrong. I should fear becoming a civilization that watches innocents die because protocols matter more than lives. He withdrew his opposition to the Mutual Defense Coalition. The vote proceeded. Humanity received full council membership with 80% approval. Captain Youngme was released with a formal reprimand that everyone knew was purely symbolic. The Pelkari situation sparked a complete revision of first contact protocols, adding provisions for genuine humanitarian emergencies. Earth's name remained in the archives as a Class 12 death world, a warning and a testament. But humanity became something the galaxy had never expected. Not conquerors, but protectors. When pirates threatened trade routes, human patrol ships responded. When natural disasters struck, human aid arrived first. When civilizations came into conflict, human mediators applied hard-won lessons from Earth's bloodiest histories. 5 years after that pivotal day, Ambassador Deho stood in the council chamber where his species had once been judged. Now he watched 3 new species gain membership, all from harsh worlds, all inspired by humanity's example. The galaxy had learned that difficult origins didn't determine destiny. Suffering could forge either monsters or protectors, and the choice belonged to each species. Hyejin joined Deho at the observation window. They're calling us the Death World Coalition now, species that survived the worst but chose to be better. Earth prepared us for everything except acceptance, Deho replied with a slight smile. Now we have to figure out what peace looks like. It's harder than war in some ways. As they prepared to leave, Vexilor the archivist approached privately. The crystalline being's light pulsed with significance. Ambassador, there's something you should know. Earth appears in our oldest archives, from before the Council existed, before any current civilization emerged. Deho frowned. How old? 3 billion years, Vexilor said softly. And the notation, written in the oldest form of the old tongue, says the same thing in every ancient language we've deciphered. The archivist's form shimmered with something like reverence. This world will birth either the galaxy's salvation or its doom. Pray they choose salvation. Deho looked out at the stars, at the vast galaxy that humanity was now part of. Somewhere out there, Earth continued its deadly rotation, forging new generations in the same crucible that had created humanity. We're trying, he whispered. We're trying. Deep in Earth's Amazon rainforest, where humanity's ancestors first learned that cooperation meant survival, a new monument stood. Black stone carved with names, thousands of them. Commander Borum's crew listed first, followed by every human who had died protecting the galaxy in the 5 years since first contact. More names were added every month. The inscription, written in every galactic language including the old tongue, was simple. We came from death. We learned from death. We chose life. Not just for us. For all. Ships from across the galaxy visited that monument. Species who had feared humanity now sent their young to learn from it. The lesson was always the same. Death worlds didn't create monsters. They created survivors. And survivors, given the choice, often became the fiercest protectors. The galaxy watched Earth's name in the archives. The terror had faded, replaced by something more complex: respect, gratitude, and hope. When death worlds gave birth to civilizations, they created beings who understood suffering intimately, and beings who understood suffering could choose either to inflict it or prevent it. Humanity had chosen. The galaxy was better for it, and somewhere in the vast cosmos, other death worlds continued their work, forging new species and fires that would either destroy them or make them into exactly what the galaxy needed. The universe was vast, life was resilient, and Earth's children walked among the stars carrying lessons written in 4 billion years of survival. They were strong because they had to be. They were compassionate because they chose to be. They were human because Earth had made them so, and that, the galaxy learned, was enough.